Salt and Silence. Beneath the Serpent's Wake. Episode 1. The Gathering Shadows. The small coastal town of Westvale had always been known for its fog. Thick, ocean-laden mists blanketed the sprawling docks and narrow cobblestone streets each morning, so persistent that residents joked the sun considered Westvale unworthy of its warm attention. In that persistent gloom, an outsider's mind naturally conjured images of subterfuge and hidden secrets, things creeping just out of view behind the pale haze. For the people who lived there, though, fog wasn't cause for fear, but routine, as though it were a dull stage curtain that rose each midday to reveal life going on as usual beneath. However, recent events made the fog feel different. Beneath that hush, an uneasy tension brewed. Whispers abounded at the local diner, the Lighthouse Cafe, a beloved place for coffee, conversation, and the best homemade pies for 100 miles. People spoke in low tones about the bizarre thefts, a handful of them, each stranger than the last. First, a single black gull feather pinned to the door of the town library went missing. Then an ancient brass ship's bell from the local museum disappeared, without any visible forced entry. Even the local antiques dealer reported that a very old-looking chest key had inexplicably vanished from inside a locked display. These thefts, random as they seemed, had an aura of deliberate intrigue that didn't sit well with Westvale's ordinary citizens. Into this uneasy hush came two outsiders, each with their own reasons for visiting Westvale. Neither knew the other, nor did they know how deeply they'd become entangled in the town's secrets. But Westvale had a way of pulling the unsuspecting into its mysteries, as though the fog itself wove threads around them. 1. The Detective in the Fog. Detective Rowan Byrne exhaled slowly through pursed lips, gazing out of his rental car at the thick drifts of white that obscured almost everything. Only the hazy shapes of squat buildings emerged from the walls of mist. Byrne, tall, dark-haired, with a wiry build and a practiced steadiness in his grey eyes, had seen stranger places in his 15-year career as a private investigator, but there was something about Westvale, even at first sight, that unsettled him. Perhaps it was the reminiscent hush of the old fishing village where he grew up. Perhaps it was the hush of the ocean, whispering just beyond the quiet streets. He brushed aside the thought. He was here to track down a certain missing antique. His client, a reclusive art collector named Devon Mowbray, had insisted that the stolen piece, an elaborate 18th-century locket, was somewhere in Westvale. Byrne's first step: gather intel on the local scene. According to rumors, petty thefts had been happening around town. Maybe they were connected, maybe not. But Byrne knew that in small towns, random details often knitted themselves together in surprising ways. With the detective's careful deliberation, he stepped out of the car. At once, the cold brine of the sea stung his nostrils. Seagulls drifted in the sky overhead, their keening cries muffled by the mist. He grabbed his duffel, locked the car, and walked toward an old two-story building with a peeling sign that read, "Boarding House, Rooms and Breakfast." The place was recommended by the local real estate agent who had once aided Mowbray in an auction. Byrne felt the wooden steps creak beneath his feet. The next moment, the door opened, as if summoned by his approach. A woman in her late 60s, wearing a warm sweater and a hesitant smile, greeted him. "You must be Rowan Byrne," she said, eyeing him carefully. "Call me Rowan, please," he said with a nod. "You're Mrs. Sweeney?" She nodded. "I got your call. Your room's ready. Come on in." Inside, the boarding house smelled of lemon polish and distant cooking, something hearty, stew-like, that made Byrne's stomach rumble. The sitting room beyond the foyer was furnished with a mismatched array of chairs and crocheted blankets. He suspected that the place was mostly empty, as it was the off-season for tourists. "I'll show you to your room," Mrs. Sweeney said, her tone warm but with a hint of watchfulness. "Not many come this time of year, with the fog and all. Are you on a business trip?" "Something like that," Byrne replied. "Research, mostly." Mrs. Sweeney nodded, but didn't press. She led him upstairs to a cozy corner bedroom with a single bed, an old mahogany dresser, and a wide window that, presumably on a clear day, might look out over the sea. Right now, it showed only a milky blankness. "If you need anything, just ring," the landlady said, motioning to a little brass bell on the dresser. "I live downstairs, front apartment." "Thank you, Mrs. Sweeney." She gave him one more lingering look, as though appraising how long he might stay or whether he'd cause trouble, before shutting the door behind her. Byron set down his duffel and looked around. No phone in the room, no TV. Good. He preferred the quiet. He sat at the edge of the bed and pulled from his pocket the item that had led him all this way, a photograph of a locket. It was oval, intricately filigreed, bearing a single carved letter on the front, C. The letter was stylized like a crest. His client said the locket once belonged to a sea captain's wife, and that local legend placed it here, in Westvale, after the captain's ship sank some 2 centuries ago. The question remained, why would someone steal it now? No matter. Byrne would find out soon enough. For now, he planned to pay a visit to the local antique dealer, the museum, perhaps the library. He'd fish around, see who might be interested in antique maritime trinkets, and by nightfall, he hoped to have a few leads. 2. The Seeker of Legends. While Byron was settling into the boarding house, another figure stood at the end of the dock, gazing out into the endless sea. Cassia Morell was a historian who specialized in maritime folklore, with a specific passion for old diaries, missing captain's logs, and legends of cursed artifacts. She'd come to Westvale after receiving a tip from a colleague. Rumor said an extremely rare item, a small weathered chest containing a coded logbook, had passed through the town's old auction house a decade ago. Its location was now unknown, but clues pointed to Westvale. If found, it could illuminate hidden chapters of a lost 18th-century expedition. Cassia, petite with hazel eyes and dark curls that tumbled well past her shoulders, shivered in the cold dampness. She pulled her coat tighter and looked down at a piece of paper in her hand, an address for the Westvale Public Library, where she hoped to find local records from that period. This place, with its swirling mists and ghostly silhouettes of ships in the harbour, made her heart pound with excitement. She'd always loved such remote spots, where history felt alive, creeping through the fog. As she left the dock behind, her boots thumped on the wet boards. She made her way to the main street, searching for the library. This early in the day, shop doors were just flipping signs to open. The smell of coffee drifted from the Lighthouse Cafe, and she considered stopping in. But her curiosity propelled her forward until she found a stone building with tall, arched windows. It seemed more like a small chapel than a library. A wooden sign, elegantly lettered, confirmed it was indeed Westvale Public Library. Inside, the scent of old books enveloped her like a comforting embrace. Rows of shelves filled the high-ceilinged space, and a mezzanine level above held further volumes. Beneath the hush of the library, Cassia heard only a faint hum of fluorescent lights. At the front desk, a willowy librarian in glasses, who wore her hair in a neat bun, eyed Cassia with polite curiosity. "Good morning," the librarian said softly. "May I help you find something?" Cassia nodded eagerly. "Yes, actually. I'm looking for local historical records, ship manifests, diaries, anything from the 18th century, possibly related to a Captain James Hawksmoor or his family." A flicker of surprise passed over the librarian's face. "Captain Hawksmoor, you say? That name comes up occasionally among local legends. He was rumored to have hidden something along the coastline or at sea." She paused, glancing around as though to ensure no one overheard. "My name is Eliza Marlowe, by the way. Let me show you where we keep our historical archives." Cassia followed Eliza to a glassed-in room at the far back, where she unlocked a door labelled Archives. Inside were rows of metal filing cabinets, old ledgers, and large bound volumes in neat stacks. The librarian gestured to a corner desk. "You can set up here. If you need anything, please ask. This isn't a busy time for us, so you'll have privacy." "Thank you. I appreciate it," Cassia said, her voice hushed with gratitude. Eliza began pulling out a few ledgers from a shelf. Start with these. They cover the period from 1770 to 1800. If you find references to Hawksmoor, note them carefully. There might also be some references in personal diaries that we have on microfilm, but I'll have to fetch those from the back. Let me know. With that, the librarian slipped out, leaving Cassia alone with the half-forgotten records. She seated herself at the desk, turned on a small reading lamp, and began flipping through the first ledger. The paper was brittle and yellowed, the script an ornate cursive. There were references to merchant ships, fishing vessels, births and deaths at sea. A few pages in, she found a mention of a Hawksmoor. A thrill coursed through her. Maybe she would actually piece together the puzzle of Captain Hawksmoor's final voyage. 3. A chance meeting at the Lighthouse Cafe. Around noon, Detective Byron decided to get something to eat. He'd spent the morning revisiting the museum and gleaning an unhelpful statement from its curator about the missing brass ship's bell. He'd also questioned the antique dealer who had reported the vanished key. Again, no solid leads, only speculation that some new collector in town might be involved. The detective had gleaned that the thefts began about a month ago, each seemingly unconnected. But the local police had found no suspects, no footprints, and no sign of forced entry. The press, such as it was, wrote it off as random vandalism. Hearing that the Lighthouse Cafe was the spot for coffee and local gossip, he went there, stepping in from the grey gloom outside into a warm, inviting environment. The place smelled of hot soup and fresh bread. Minimal chatter came from the scattered customers, and a chalkboard by the counter listed the day's specials. He spotted a single open stool at the far end of the counter and took it, removing his coat and gloves. A waitress with curly black hair came over, smile friendly. "What can I get you?" "Coffee," he said. "And the clam chowder special, please." "You got it." She turned to convey the order. Byron surveyed the cafe. A few booths were occupied by locals who were either reading newspapers or chatting in hushed tones. He saw a pair of fishermen, their boots still flecked with scales, huddled over cups of coffee. An older couple shared a slice of pie, whispering while glancing occasionally at the detective. Small towns, he thought. Word would spread quickly that a stranger was here, asking questions. A moment later, the waitress returned with his coffee. "Anything else?" "Actually," he said, "maybe you can help me. I'm new here. I heard the town's had some trouble lately. Theft, break-ins, that sort of thing." She tensed a little. "Oh, you're that P.I. Mrs. Sweeney's renting a room to, aren't you?" He gave a small nod, not surprised the rumor had already made the rounds. "What have you heard?" She shrugged, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping too conspicuously. "That weird stuff has been disappearing. Old relics, mostly. They're worthless to everyday folk, but may be valuable to collectors. Then there's the weird notes left at the scenes. The police are hush-hush about it, but I've heard from folks who've seen them. Little scraps of parchment that look ages old, with strange symbols. No one knows what they mean." Byron paused, absorbing this new detail. Notes with symbols? Not a modern language? The waitress shook her head. "I'll see if I can find someone who can describe them. That's all I know." He thanked her quietly. The arrival of his chowder ended the conversation, but his mind was already reeling. The locket he was after, could it also have had some scrap of parchment or coded symbol attached? Some bigger game might be in play here. He sipped his coffee, deciding he'd keep an eye out for anyone researching Westvale's old lore or maritime legends. When he glanced around for potential conversation targets, he noticed a young woman with dark curly hair and an academic air about her, seated alone at a table in the corner. She was hunched over a library ledger or some historical text, taking notes. For an instant, the detective considered approaching her. She certainly didn't look like a local, but he decided to wait. Forcing contact might spook her. Little did he know that their paths would cross soon enough. 4th, a library discovery. Cassia arrived at the cafe around the same time, but she chose a corner booth to keep reading the ledger she'd borrowed from the library with special permission. The mention of Captain Hawksmoor's name had intrigued her deeply. According to the old town ledger, he was known for transporting delicate goods from an unspecified location in the East Indies. Rumors of cursed cargo circulated among the superstitious. Yet the ledger didn't specify more. She'd read about a ship's bell, presumably from Hawksmoor's vessel, which might have ended up in a local museum. Then she discovered a scribbled footnote about a missing chest key. Her heart jumped. A key could lead to a chest. When the waitress took her order, just a hot chocolate, as she was too distracted to eat, Cassia noticed a tall man at the counter. He looked like a traveler, or maybe a private detective from an old film. She wondered if he was a tourist. Perhaps he was just here for fishing. She shrugged and turned back to her reading. Her eyes latched onto the next text, a short passage referencing a small cryptic note found in the pocket of the drowned captain. The ledger said the note was rumored to contain directions or an encoded location. Cassia felt a surge of excitement. If such a note existed, it could be key to her search. The legend of Captain Hawksmoor claimed his final cargo was never recovered. Some believed it was hidden along the coastline. Over the centuries, numerous treasure hunters had come through Westvale with no luck. Could this recent spate of thefts be connected to that centuries-old mystery? She made a quick note in her notepad. Check local newspaper archives, past decades, for references to Hawksmoor's chest. Possibly also recent, strange thefts? Finishing her hot chocolate, she gathered her things. A thought struck her. Maybe the local antique dealer or the museum curator would know about any items connected to Hawksmoor's legend. She tossed some coins on the table and walked toward the door. On her way out, she bumped into a broad-shouldered figure stepping away from the counter. "Excuse me," she mumbled, flustered. He glanced down, gave a half-smile. "No problem. You all right?" "Yes, yes," Cassia stammered, hugging her books to her chest. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Me neither. Have a good day," the man said, stepping aside. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, as though something important might be shared if only they paused longer. But both hurried on their separate ways, each unaware of how soon fate would draw them into the same orbit. 5. Secrets in the Museum. Later that day, Cassia ventured to the Westvale Maritime Museum, located near the docks. The two-story building, made of stone and wood, housed a modest but well-curated collection of maritime artifacts. Old sextants, worn figureheads from sunken ships, and the famed Westvale brass diving helmet that had once graced the cover of a regional travel magazine. It wasn't large, but it was carefully arranged. A quiet hush, broken only by the squeak of floorboards underfoot, accompanied Cassia as she wandered through, searching for references to Captain Hawksmoor. An older gentleman, presumably the curator, approached. He wore a name tag, Graham Ellison. "Good afternoon, miss. Can I help you find something?" "Yes," she replied, stepping toward a glass display with an intricately carved wooden box on a pedestal. "I'm a historian researching Captain James Hawksmoor, an 18th-century figure connected to these waters. I read that you once displayed a ship's bell believed to be from his vessel." Ellison's face darkened slightly. "Ah, yes. We did have such a bell. It's gone missing." "Missing?" she said, startled. "I heard about thefts around town. That bell was stolen." "Indeed," he sighed. "About a month ago. No sign of forced entry. Just gone in the morning. The police suspect someone who knows maritime antiques well, but they've found no leads." Cassia felt her pulse quicken. "May I see where it was displayed?"
The curator hesitated, then nodded and led her to a vacant display stand near the far wall. A simple brass placard read, "Ship's Bell, C. 1765, origin unknown." If it truly was from the lost Hawksmoor vessel, that was a major clue.
"Did you ever notice any inscriptions on it?" Cassia asked quietly, kneeling to examine the empty stand. There were faint etchings, but nothing conclusive. I recall a stylized letter C, very similar to a crest, or maybe an old shipping company mark. I'd always wondered if it had come from the HMS Crestfullen, but that ship was rumoured lost near the Cape. Then again, there are so many legends swirling around these waters. Cassia's mind spun. She recalled from the library ledger that Captain Hawksmoor's wife's name was Cora. Could that stylized C have been for Cora? Was the bell not from a different ship, but from Hawksmoor's? Another puzzle piece. She thanked Ellison and politely inquired if there were any other Hawksmoor-related artifacts. He shrugged. The museum had an old portrait said to show Hawksmoor's wife, but it was never proven. We sold it years ago at an auction to raise funds. Shame, but we had to keep our doors open. He rubbed his temple, looking tired. I wish we could do more to protect our collection from theft. Cassia left the museum with a sense that Hawksmoor's legend had a more tangible presence here than mere rumour. If someone was targeting maritime artifacts with that sea crest, maybe they sought to piece together the final resting place of Hawksmoor's cargo. And if so, why? 6. Nighttime Whispers. Dusk settled over Westvale, the fog returning with renewed density, swirling through the streets like living tendrils. Lamps glowed dimly, more like blurred orbs than crisp lights. Detective Byrne stood outside the antiques shop just off Main Street, waiting for the proprietor, Mr. Finch, to close up. He'd spent the afternoon double-checking Finch's story about the missing chest key. Finch insisted the key belonged to an 1800s lockbox, provenance unknown. Yet the shop's locks weren't tampered with. The key simply vanished from inside a glass case. Odd. A chill wind off the ocean made Byrne pull his coat tighter. He lit a cigarette, an old habit from the days he worked homicide in a big city. Smoke curled in the damp air. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure slinking through the swirling fog, heading toward the alley behind the shop. The figure wore a dark coat, hood pulled up. Instinctively, Byrne turned off his phone's flashlight and stepped back into the deeper shadows, watching. The unknown figure paused at the side door to the antiques shop, crouched down as if examining the door. After a moment, they took out a thin tool. Something metallic glinted in the pale lamplight. Byrne's heart quickened. Was this a break-in attempt? He approached quietly, stepping heel to toe on the damp ground to minimize sound. As he neared, he accidentally kicked a loose pebble. The figure froze, turned in alarm. Byrne lunged, grabbing the intruder's shoulder. "Who are you?" he demanded in a low, urgent voice. A brief struggle ensued, enough for Byrne to realize the intruder was slight of build and surprisingly quick. The figure wrenched free, stumbling back. Byrne reached to grab them again, but they slipped from his grasp and darted deeper into the alley. He gave chase, but the figure seemed to know the labyrinth of narrow passages better than he did. The swirling fog gave them cover, and they vanished into the night. Panting, Byrne cursed under his breath, stepping into a circle of dim lamplight. He didn't get a good look at them. No face, no distinguishing features. All he had was an impression. They were desperate, searching for something. Perhaps the same something he was after. Returning to the antiques shop side door, he found faint scratch marks near the lock. No question about it. Someone had tried to break in. The detective lingered a moment, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Nothing. But the night felt thick with tension, as if multiple watchers hid within the swirling fog. Finally, he exhaled and headed to the local police station to file a report, even though he wasn't officially working with the authorities. Something bigger than petty theft was unfolding here, and he needed all available resources. 7. Convergence of clues. The following day dawned just as grey and damp. Word travelled fast that a break-in at the antiques shop had been thwarted. Locals muttered about it at the post office, the diner, even outside the tiny police station. One rumour suggested the intruder might be from a secret society that had existed in Westvale for centuries, seeking to reclaim sacred objects. Another rumour said it was just a vagrant. In a town like Westvale, speculation ran rampant. That morning, Cassia decided to visit the local archives, hoping to find any mention of coded messages associated with Captain Hawksmoor's lost cargo. She was permitted a short session with the microfilm. With the old machine whirring under dim library lighting, she scrolled through newspaper columns from decades ago. Her eyes skimmed quickly. Fishing competition winners, obituaries, even old maritime tragedies. Then she caught a snippet. 1892, August 4th. Local fisherman claims discovery of ancient map in seaside cave. A few lines below, there was mention of a partial code said to be in strange runic symbols. The fisherman's name was Barnabas Fitch. He claimed the map pointed to a chest or casket that once belonged to a notorious captain. The story ended with Fitch vanishing at sea, map presumably lost. Cassia printed the article. Then she noticed a small footnote appended to it. Map rumored to be locked away in the Fitch family's old chest, requiring a small brass key to open. She felt a jolt of recognition. Finch? Fitch? Possibly the same family name, spelled differently over time. Could the antiques dealer, Mr. Finch, be a descendant of Barnabas Fitch? Could the stolen key have been the very item needed to open that chest containing the coded map? Meanwhile, across town, Detective Byrne was piecing together a similar puzzle. After a short chat with the local officer, he learned the break-in suspect might have left behind a dropped item in the alley, a small bit of old parchment with faint scribbles. The officer wrote it off as trash, but Byrne asked to see it. The scribbles were partially illegible, but he recognized some archaic symbols reminiscent of old Nordic runes or maritime code ciphers he'd once encountered. The detective felt certain these thefts, the coded symbols, and the missing locket were all connected to a bigger story. With permission, he took the parchment. Holding it up to the light, he could see stylized letters. One symbol looked suspiciously like that same letter C from the photograph of the stolen locket. 8. Paths intertwine. As noon approached, Cassia decided she needed to talk to Mr. Finch about Barnabas Fitch. She walked through the fog-draped streets until she reached the antiques shop, only to find the door locked and the store closed. A wooden sign read, "Closed for inventory." Frustrated, she peered through the window. She saw movement inside, someone rummaging in the back room. She knocked lightly. A startled face emerged, a man with thinning hair and a worried frown. He opened the door a crack. "Yes?" "Mr. Finch?" she asked politely. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Cassia Morell. I'm a historian, and I'd like to speak with you about a missing chest key. I believe it may be connected to an old family chest from the late 1800s, possibly your ancestors." Finch's eyes widened with alarm, and he quickly ushered her inside, locking the door behind them. What do you know about that key?" Cassia explained what she'd found in the archives about Barnabas Fitch, the rumored coded map, and how the key might connect to a chest that the Finch family once possessed. Finch wrung his hands. "It's true. My grandfather changed the family name's spelling after some unpleasant associations. Long story. That key's been in our family for generations, said to open a small chest rumored to contain, well, an old map or some instructions regarding Hawksmoor's lost cargo. But that's just a legend. We never had the chest itself, so I never knew if it was real. Yet about a month ago, the key vanished from my locked display. And then someone tried to break in here again last night. It's madness." Cassia leaned forward, heart racing. "Mr. Finch, I think someone's collecting items connected to Captain Hawksmoor, a bell, a portrait, maybe that key. If the rumor is true, and that chest or map leads to his lost cargo, they might be looking for the final piece. Do you know who might want it?" Finch shook his head miserably. "I have no idea. Our family never truly believed the treasure stories. We just held on to that key as a curiosity." Suddenly, a soft rap came at the locked front door. Both Cassia and Finch tensed. Through the glass, Detective Byrne's face appeared, wearing the same curious half-smile Cassia remembered from the cafe. Finch scurried to open the door, letting the detective in. Byron nodded at Cassia, recognizing her from that quick bump at the cafe. He turned to Finch, his tone measured. I hear you had an attempted break-in last night. I'd like to ask you some questions. His gaze flicked to Cassia. And you are? She introduced herself, explaining her historical research. Byron reciprocated with a succinct introduction. Rowan Byron, private investigator. He looked at Finch. Mind if I join this conversation? Finch hesitated, but Cassia spoke quickly. It's all related. We might be chasing the same leads. So Finch, Cassia, and Byron gathered in the cluttered antiques shop, their voices hushed amid shelves brimming with old clocks, tarnished silver, and dusty books. Finch recounted the key's provenance and the rumoured chest that might contain a coded map. Cassia shared her archival discoveries. Byron added the detail about the archaic symbols found on the dropped parchment. They concluded that these thefts were no random spree. Someone was systematically gathering every link to Captain Hawksmoor's legacy, possibly to locate the so-called lost cargo. Cassia revealed her suspicion that Hawksmoor's cargo might be more than just gold or jewels. Old diaries hinted it contained something unholy or even cursed. Byrne, more pragmatic, said it could be historically significant contraband or valuables. Either way, someone was working in the shadows to piece it all together. In that cramped shop, it became clear that they too needed to piece together the puzzle. Fast. Cassia volunteered her research skills. Byrne would handle investigative angles. Finch, though nervous, offered any artifacts or documents that might help. They agreed to pool resources. For all they knew, the next theft or break-in would occur that very night. Outside, the fog pressed against the antique shop's windows like a curious eavesdropper. Inside, three unlikely allies stood at the threshold of a mystery, each drawn by different motivations: a detective's sense of duty, a historian's passion for the truth, and an antique shop owner's ancestral burden. None of them yet knew the lengths to which the hidden adversary would go, but a sense of urgency pulsed in the stale air. 9. The first hints of a larger conspiracy. Before leaving, Byron asked Finch one final question. Is there anything else in your shop that might be tied to Hawksmoor's legend? Even something you've dismissed as junk? Finch paled slightly, then rummaged behind the counter, producing a tattered old pamphlet or journal. I've had this for years, but it's incomplete. Pages missing. It might be from that era. It references a Cora Hawksmoor, but I never confirmed it. He handed it to Byron. Cassia, curiosity piqued, leaned over. The cover was partly torn off, but the inside pages showed a neat, feminine hand scrawling something about my beloved James's final journey. Could this be the journal of Captain Hawksmoor's wife? The pages referencing the final journey are missing, Finch lamented. If it's authentic, it may be valuable, but without the missing section, it's incomplete. Byron carefully placed the journal in his satchel. We'll get it examined. He thanked Finch for his cooperation, exchanged phone numbers, and left with Cassia trailing behind. Once on the street, Cassia turned to Byron, breath visible in the cold air. Thank you for letting me be part of this. I know this might be a police matter. Byron gave a small smile. This town has secrets, and it seems we both want to uncover them. Working together might be our best bet. Cassia's eyes shone. Agreed. If you don't mind, I'll go see if the librarian, Eliza Marlowe, can help us decipher some of these archaic symbols. She's been very helpful so far. Byron nodded. I'll swing by the police station, see if they have any leads on last night's intruder. They parted ways, drifting in opposite directions down the fog-shrouded street, their breath merging with the damp air. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of eyes watched from across the street, masked by the swirling gloom. Once they disappeared, the observer melted back into the mist, silent as a phantom. 10th dawn of the deeper mystery. That evening, thick clouds gathered, promising a storm. Rain began to patter against rooftops, a muted hiss in the darkness. Cassia sat in her small motel room near the edge of town, reading through the partial journal in hopes of gleaning anything new. Byrne, back at Mrs. Sweeney's boarding house, cross-referenced the locket's photograph, the partial journal, and the archaic symbols on the scrap of parchment. His phone buzzed occasionally with calls from old colleagues who might help identify the script, but no definitive answers emerged. Despite the tension, an undercurrent of excitement ran through both Cassia and Byrne. They were on the cusp of unraveling a riddle that had spanned centuries, one that merged local legend and possibly something bigger, something that might have global significance if the cargo was truly cursed or carried some unique historical value. Unseen by them, the rest of Westvale lay quiet and watchful. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the tide crashed fiercely against the docks. The next phase of the mystery was about to unfold, and the stakes would rise. Perhaps the ghostly presence of Captain Hawksmoor lingered in these waters, weaving illusions in the fog, guiding those who sought his final secret. Or perhaps it was something far more tangible and ruthless, a modern conspirator who'd stop at nothing to claim what was lost. However it played out, the detective, the historian, and the reluctant antiques dealer were now firmly entangled in the puzzle. They had set foot on a path leading into Westvale's dark heart, bound by curiosity, a sense of duty, and a desperate determination to unmask the truth. In the episodes to come, each clue would illuminate the next step, each betrayal would deepen the shadows, and the final revelation would, if they survived to see it, shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew.